Marley was dead to begin with. This fact must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the tale I'm about to relate. And nothing wonderful can come about this holiday event panel from ConTinual without knowing Marley was as dead as a doornail, because this is the ConTinual panel on A Christmas Carol. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and I will be your host today with four wonderful writers and friends: Jeanne Adams, Darin Kennedy, Jim Nettles, and Nancy Northcott, who are all here to discuss why Alistair Sim is the only Christmas Carol. But I won't say that right up front. I'll let them tell me that I'm wrong. And we'll do that by letting them introduce themselves and then get into the party. Okay, starting with you, Jeanne.
Hi, I'm Jeanne Adams, and I write romantic suspense, paranormal romantic suspense, urban fantasy, and space adventure with my colleague Nancy Northcott, and I love A Christmas Carol.
And Darin?
Magic.
As if from thin air. I'm Darin Kennedy. I write contemporary thriller, paranormal stuff, and contemporary fantasy. And I wrote Christmas Carol so much that I rewrote it, and we're going to be talking about that.
Yes, we are. Okay. Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. I independently publish several subgenres of romance. And as Jeanne said, she and I write science fiction mystery adventure together.
And finally, Jim?
And I'm Jim Nettles, and I write science fiction, urban fantasy, bit of horror, bit of contemporary, bit of gothic, bit of this, that, and the other, as well as a fair amount of nonfiction in a lot of different spaces, but none of those are going to be underneath the Christmas tree. And I thought we were here to talk about the Grinch.
No, I'm so sorry. We're not here to talk about Krampus either, even though that's what you came dressed for.
Yeah, well, I came dressed as my favorite Christmas holiday character.
Punishing evildoers, right? Well,
is that the idea? Oh, I thought it was just to find the kids to cook and eat.
Well, yeah, they're kids. They're evildoers by definition. I remember what I was like.
Was?
I'm much tougher now. I wouldn't be a very good meal for Krampus. Too stringy. Yeah, well, speaking of things that, retribution, punishment, eating, because that does figure in it. Let's talk a bit about A Christmas Carol. What was your first encounter with the Dickens tale? Jim?
Oh, that's a good question. So I remember, it's hard to remember which one was the first one. I remember a couple of different animated versions. There was one that I remember that, it was a little bit softened up for kids, but, it was the animated version. But I also remember watching a lot of the black and white ones, because I remember listening to Vincent Price as he narrated one of the particular versions as well. And how can you forget Vincent Price? And that was probably the reason I was watching it, was because, well, him.
Did he ever play Ebenezer Scrooge? I mean, most actors do essay the role at some point or another, but I don't seem to recall. Here he is, this icon of horror movies, and he didn't do Ebenezer.
I don't think he ever did Ebenezer. I know he did the voiceover for the film, and I know he did a number of others, but I don't think he ever actually played on screen in any of them, which was probably extraordinarily disappointing to me at a way too young of an age to be watching that version. But hey, that made me who I am today, which makes
disappointments. Yeah, I can tell. Jeanne, how about you? What was your first encounter?
Well, my parents felt like neither Shakespeare nor Dickens were too scary for their children. So my first adventure with the Christmas Carol was reading it as a group read with my family.
Mhm.
And then I think I've seen most versions of it, starting with the glorious black and white and the slippers flying over the head. And my favorite was probably The Muppet Christmas Carol and George C. Scott.
We'll talk about them in a minute, but yeah, so with you guys, it was reading it. Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Darin, yes, you really do love Carol and Christmas. And we'll get to that, but what was your first encounter with the story?
When I go back and think about it, I think the George C. Scott television movie is the first one that I remember. And when someone says Ebenezer Scrooge and I close my eyes and picture him, I see George C. Scott with the mutton chops. And when I think of the Spirit of Christmas Present, I see that man with the really thick red beard from the George C. Scott version. And so that one's the one that has the biggest imprint on me. I also love Bill Murray's Scrooged. That movie makes me cry every single time. And it gets me because Bill Murray can make you laugh, but when he wants to gut punch you in the feels, he's really good at that too. And so I love both of those, but I think my first one was George C. Scott. And I have to say, I think that one's my favorite too.
Okay.
So I
Nancy?
haven't seen y'all's.
Nancy?
Well, like Jim, I have vague memories of watching various black and white versions on TV growing up. The first one I really remember is the George C. Scott one. It's not my favorite, which is actually one of the black and white ones, which I discovered later, but I know we're going to come back to that. So I'll go with George C. Scott for right now.
Okay. In all of the Christmas carols, they all take liberties with the books. For example, George C. Scott, who played Patton as well, is a big, he's a man who is large on the screen, and projects a sense of breadth. And yet, when you read the story itself, you get the feeling, the impression of this grasping, conniving, miserable sinner who has shrunken into himself, as opposed, during the process of turning into the miser that we see at the opening of the book. But everybody takes different liberties, including, in the Alastair Sim version, we've got a ballet dancer in a cloak playing Death. And let me tell you, for those of you who've not seen it, it's the scariest damn thing you ever saw. But that's not the way Death is portrayed. Likewise, in the book, the Spirit of Christmas Past is a small child. And Spirit of Christmas Present is a man in his prime. The spirit of...
You're talking about the Spirit of Christmas Yet to Come?
Yeah.
Not sure that's definitely the Grim Reaper. I would say Spirit of Christmas Yet to Come. Friend of death, but maybe not death itself.
Well,
the scariest damn one is in Scrooged.
Yeah.
That's the scariest one I've ever seen.
What I was going to get at was everybody's taking liberties. So nothing is absolutely true to the book. Which ones took the liberties that drive you insane?
Ooh.
And so, I'm going to start with you, Darin. Go right ahead.
I actually, because I was working on my book, watched a Hallmark Christmas Carol, which was called It's Christmas, Carol, because it was at least in a similar vein to what I was working on. And in this one, if I recall, they really cheapened it because I'm pretty sure it was Carrie Fisher. And I love me some Carrie Fisher, but they had her play all three spirits. And I was like, that's just wrong because they should be three distinct entities, and that's one of the things that makes the story so cool. And having her just show up and go, hey Carol, here's your past that where you screwed up, and here's your present where you're screwing up, and here's your future which has no teeth because it's Hallmark. So that's the one that I probably liked the least, but specifically because I need three spirits. So there's mine.
And to save on the actors. But
Yeah. Basically,
yeah.
it's an economic decision, and that's really.
Y'all make 400,000 Christmas movies every 365 days. Get two more actors. I know there's only 4 in all of them, but find a couple somewhere. There's more than that many people in Canada, I think. And that's all.
I didn't like the animated version they did in 2009 with Jim Carrey. I just think the liberties they did take made it so, it kind of made it really bland. It didn't have any impact. The impact with Marley and the rattling chains. I mean, even the Muppets did it better. And of course, there's song and dance in the Muppets, so I love that one too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think that Jim Carrey version just really stank.
Yeah, if an animated version or a Muppet version can get it right, because my first exposure was the Mr. Magoo Christmas Carol, and I remember all the pieces being there, and they were all kind of scary for an animated version. So, yeah, Jim, what about you? Which one drives you insane, and why?
Well, probably the one that for me was most disappointing was the one with Patrick Stewart, because I love me some Patrick Stewart. And I thought it was interesting because they actually start with the funeral and lowering him into the ground and all that kind of good stuff. But it really was more of just a dour outing than it was truly that Christmas horror, that idea of, because I mean, so much of the Dickens comes from that fear of death and the fear of winter and that change that comes in culture, which is part of the reason we love the ghost stories around that time of year. And this was more of a, foul spirit, why are you bothering me again? Engage, number one, where are you? And it is, as much as I like Patrick Stewart, it just felt dour. It just felt and did not have kind of that gravity, because Patrick Stewart was a little too refined in his Scrooge to not have that edge of miserliness. He didn't have that cutting edge that the spirits could actually play off of, because you had to have that hammering against the edge to finally dull Scrooge, and it just didn't really have it for me.
Yeah, I would say that that's similar. I'm also a big Patrick Stewart fan because, hey, Star Trek, aside from the X-Men and everything else, which were of course still in the future at that point, the X-Men, I mean.
Yeah.
But I just remember not being engaged by the Patrick Stewart one. I mean, Jim said number one, engage, and I just never felt engaged with the movie. And I think maybe it is because it just didn't have the up and down moods that I sort of expect from the Christmas Carol, because Scrooge is terrified and then he's like, pah, humbug, that's ridiculous. And then along comes the next ghost and it's not ridiculous. And then you need real jubilation at the end of the Christmas Carol. That's the payoff for everything that we've been through at the end. And there's nothing really that I could pinpoint about the performances or the script. I just remember not feeling drawn into it the way I had hoped to.
It was all kind of one note. You never really saw him as this. He never came quite across as the miserly, nasty man. And that's one of the things I think both Sim and Scott pulled off really well, is that nastiness, that real dearth of spirit. Whereas Patrick Stewart didn't come across as mean and miserly, which meant that his change to being tearful was not very dramatic.
Yeah, the miserliness, and in the best versions, I think, you not only have that miserliness, but you also have the sense that miserliness breeds personal misery.
Mhm.
And, you know, you can see that in the Scott one, because he's, you know, twisting himself up. And yeah, in the Alastair Sim one, when you go into these rooms that look like Victorian tenements, even though they're spacious, they are literally falling apart. Or the bowl of gruel, which, you know, being in Scotland, that's sort of home cooking. But yeah, the thinness of the gruel, that you really want to put bread in it, and you're not only making everybody else miserable, you're making yourself miserable to no end, because he's as rich as Croesus, you know?
You
Well,
want
and
to
the
see,
meanness of spirit
Yeah.
comes across, and the, you know, the self-loathing and the meanness of spirit really comes across in both the Sim and I think the George C. Scott one, and Scrooged too.
Mhm.
That meanness of spirit of, I'm going to be miserable. I am miserable. I'm going to take it out on absolutely everybody else, and they too shall pay for their willingness to be happy. It's very well done in those.
How
You-
dare you be happy?
Right.
you want to
Right.
see a Scrooge that when Marley shows up, Scrooge is like, go away, but leave the change so I can sell them. You know, you
I think you also need a Marley that is going to scare the shit out of you. Oops.
Yeah.
I may have to bleep myself, but yeah, you know, because you need to give this, if you need a really miserly, really twisted, miserable, grasping, conniving wretch, you need a lot of real shocks to that person's system.
Yeah.
You know, and I think did a really great Marley, but you know, who is everybody's favorite Marleys? Or do you have one? I suspect Nancy and I have the same one, but
go
Well,
ahead, y'all fight it out.
I mean,
Michael Holdern as Jacob Marley in the Alastair Sim version, when he lets fly with that.
yeah. Well, and also in that version, even though, as you say, the rooms are spacious, they're stark. They're
Mhm.
not talking about not being happy, not taking any joy in things because you're so miserly and you're pulled in. I mean, Scrooge obviously could afford carpets, nice curtains, art on the wall,
A suit,
a
more
suit.
than one.
No, he doesn't have any of that. And it's not that curtains and pictures and suits bring happiness, but they show that you're a little invested in pleasant surroundings for yourself. And Scrooge he's just not down with that.
Well, in that scene, and I'm pretty sure it's in the Sim version, I can't remember if it's the Sim version or the Scott version, where Marley appears and he unties the thing and his jaw drops.
That's my favorite
It's like,
thing.
oh, scary.
Every time the jaw drops on Marley, that's my favorite thing, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's scary. It is
Yeah.
cool.
And they did it.
Realistic too, isn't it?
Oh
Gee.
yeah, they did it. They did it really well too in the Muppet version, because there's the chains and there's Marley, and for a Muppet movie, Marley is very scary. And
Yeah.
I didn't think they pulled it off quite as well in Scrooged, but that business. And is it in the Sim one, Nancy, or is it in the?
No,
He doesn't
Scrooge
drop his,
is in
he just lets
That-
fly that scream, and that's enough.
So
already
it must be
crawled
the
over the
Scott
back of
version
your
where he unties the thing and the jaw
Yeah.
drops. That freaked me out the first time I saw it.
I think the Scrooged one is the one where he almost looks like he's cigarette ash, because he was Bill Murray's boss, and he's just
Yeah.
he's got the sunglasses. He's like disintegrating, and so
Yeah.
the Scrooged version went in a different way with it.
Yeah, that was more Weekend at Bernie's than it was Marley, really.
Right.
Well, and so the fun one, and I've only seen it once, was the Basil Rathbone version that they've rediscovered.
I've never seen.
And it was rediscovered like in the last few years. They aired it a couple of years ago, but there's a Basil Rathbone version that has a bit of that. It has that harsh edge, but it also has a bit of that home standoffishness in it as well, where it's like, spirit be gone, do not bother me. You're going to have to try harder than that. And it has that edge to it where you can almost picture that idea of what sort of demonic creature do you have to throw at him to get his attention? And I remember that kind of an edge, and it's, you know, being from the mid 50s, it was it had a bit of that edge to it that was really fun to watch. But I've only seen it like once in the last couple of years.
Cool. I'm gonna have to go look that one up.
Yeah, is it on YouTube or do you know?
That's a good question. I have to go looking now.
I think part of the point of Scrooge is a big part of him is already dead. He's dead inside and slowly dying outside. But the reason he doesn't want warmth and doesn't want stuff is because he's already dead inside. And it's not so much as, I mean, he does go from being a miser to being cheerful, but he sort of goes from being already dead and then just going to become dead in reality, as in addition to figuratively, to being alive again and like participating in life. And so it's I'm alive. Holy crap, I'm alive.
Yeah. Well, Nancy, you said this, you know, about the curtains and things like that, and the juxtaposition, and they do this a little bit in this sim, but it's so visual in the colored version with Scott, the juxtaposition of Fred's house and the warmth of the welcome and the punch and the curtains and the paintings on the walls and the wallpaper, and Scrooge's miserly little place is so dramatic. And then the whole scene where the housekeeper that he never pays much is selling the bed curtains, and they're like, "Oh Lord, you took even the bed curtains with him lying there dead." She's like, "Well, what else should I do?"
Well,
you know,
she took the shirt off the corpse. I mean, calico's just as becoming to a corpse.
Yeah,
They would have buried him in it.
But that scene is so impactful when Scrooge is watching it, because you see that recognition in his eyes. And that's one of the things I think they did really, really well, is when he begins to get it in the George C. Scott, when you really see it.
It's a difference between home and having a house. And I think that's the big thing, is that he's walking by and seeing that idea of home. That's one of those things I remember from one of the animated versions where, you know, part of Scrooge was it was a lost love that made him so bitter, which I thought was an interesting sort of twist on how they did that, from what I remember, because it's been a number of years since I saw that one either. But looking and having and seeing a little bit of that motivation as to what pushes Scrooge over that edge, I think was an interesting thing to see more of in some of the versions too. That to me is one of the things to always see is, where were you? Where did you go wrong? Because I think that's one of the big lessons of the story.
Well, there's such a contrast between the way Scrooge runs his office and the way Mr. Fezziwig ran his shop. And it's the same kind of thing that I think it was Jeannie was talking about, is that the light and the cheer and the warmth at Fred's is much like Fezziwig's. And yet Scrooge lost Fezziwig and turns his back on Fred. I mean, you sort of wonder, why do you even bother show up at Fred's? Because you treat him with disdain. You think he's stupid. Do you just go to make yourself feel better about being a miserly, shriveled husk of a person? I mean, I don't know.
Well, and one of the things I think the book dwells more on is they dwell more on that past relationship and why it failed and that it failed. And they dwell on the fact that his sister has passed away and that Fred is his only remaining relative. And that goes a little more, and it's harsh in the book.
Yeah.
And it's that he loved his sister. Did you say that? Did I miss it?
Yeah, he loved his sister, and he loved the woman he was going to marry.
But whenever he lost her, that was just gone. And so like the only person he really cared about was his sister, and then she died, and Fred is literally, that's it. And if you lose him, And it's like, it's almost like I can't even bear the thought of losing him, because he's literally, I'd rather drive him away than allow myself to be invested one more time and then lose again.
Meanwhile, Fred keeps trying because Scrooge is his only connection to his mother, and his father at this point is dead. You know, the themes of Christmas Carol are incredibly powerful, incredibly attractive, because don't we all want to think that somebody who's really wretched, especially somebody with a lot of money, can be redeemed and share that wealth in a useful way? Do you, use use these themes in your work, or have you actually taken the plot and played with it? Now I'm going to start with you, Darin, because you've done an entire book doing a gender swap. So what drew you to reimagine the journey of Scrooge? It wasn't just seeing that Hallmark movie. That Hallmark movie just made you go.
I watched the Hallmark movie years after I had already finished this book. No, I woke up, this is no lie. I woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning in 2013 and said, I'm going to write a young adult Christmas Carol. It popped into my head in a dream, and I grabbed my computer and I've still got the thing that I wrote myself, but I wrote about 4 lines that was like, Carol is, and her name is Carol, but Carol does this, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And then I shut the computer down and went back to sleep because I didn't want to lose it. And then I went to work the next day. And at the time, I'm a physician. I went to work, and my nurse at the time was Linda. And I went to work and said, Linda, I got an idea for a book. I'm going to write this thing. And I told her about it, and she got really excited about it. So one of my greatest memories was last year. Linda has not worked at our clinic for a while. Linda came in, and I knew she was coming, and I brought her a signed copy of Carol, because she was the first person I had ever told that I was going to write that book. But it actually popped into my head, I wouldn't say complete, but the basic elements in a dream about 8 years ago.
Oh, cool. Nancy and Jeannie, I know you've both written Christmas stories, Christmas at Canham Castle, Christmas at Outcast Station. Did A Christmas Carol or any of the versions of it inform any of the plot or the characterizations in those stories?
Not for me. I also have some paranormal romance Christmas stories, and it's not really a theme in those either.
Okay.
No, it hasn't for me either, because a lot of times honestly, in my brain, Christmas Carol kind of slots into horror as much as it does, fairy tale or because there's a lot of elements there that are really pretty grim.
Mm-hmm.
And so that doesn't tend to be my forte, going that grim. Like Nancy said, I've done several other Christmas stories, but I've never incorporated my love of Scrooge in it.
So the redemption aspect, with or without the horror elements, it has not really. No. Okay. Yeah. Because that's the thing that always hits me is, the ultimate redemptive arc in fiction, as far as I'm concerned. There's no redemptive arc that comes close. And it takes literally a bunch of Dei ex machina, because no way that's happening on the ground. So, Jim, we've teased you about Krampus, but you've addressed Krampus in one of your works. And have you addressed the themes of A Christmas Carol or the characterizations in any way in your work?
Well, and I've played with different little mini variations, but talking about the Krampus book, it's written really kind of be a YA Christmas horror. I wrote it because I wanted to do a good old-fashioned Christmas horror. That's not what it came out to be, but that's where I started. Was I have a fascination with a lot of the older Victorian, Edwardian era Christmas horrors and what was going on with society around them. So I set this in modern day, playing with that idea of all the new fun toys and all the mythology, but there's definitively echoes of past, present, and future in the story. And there is definitively a redemption arc going on here, as well as, if you look for it, there is a very particular Marley type character being developed going through the story. And so those elements all work their way in there, because I think if you're doing that Christmas horror, that's kind of the key of everything you'd have seen written during that period is what are the elements that make us consider who we are, where we came from, and where we headed towards. And so I love playing with those elements, because it's all about who we are and why do we believe what we believe. And that's a lot of the stuff I was playing within the elements in here.
Great. Okay. Well, now, now it comes to the really important part of the Fight Club here. What do you think, Jim, is the absolute best version of A Christmas Carol you've ever seen or listened to, other than the book itself? And that's always the caveat.
Well, and that's the caveat. So again, I am a big fan of Scrooge, because while it pokes fun at itself, I think it nails a lot of the elements so well. But I am a bigger fan of the George C. Scott version. I'll be the heretic here.
Well, actually, there are two of you here.
Yeah, not heretical at all.
Yeah,
three.
so, Darin
Yeah, I know,
is
but
also of the George C. Scott version. Why that one in particular?
Probably because it was one of the ones that I saw earliest, and it had that biggest impact on me in terms of defining the story. When I look and think in terms of actually watching something set as the period piece, set within much more of the cultural construct and things like that, then even if you look at the animated ones, they're there, but they're not. They're products of their time. That one, the George C. Scott piece, I really liked his Scrooge. That just hateful, bemoaning, absolute. And you're like, okay, I'm waiting to see you get your comeuppance. And that's one of those things that I'm always more a fan of is I'm not worried about the redemption. I'm looking more for the comeuppance. And it's like
the punishment.
The punishment. Again, we're back to his heart grew 3 sizes that day. And but I think that's always the interesting part to me to watch, is that part of the story and how he reacts. And it's just, to me, how he reacts to the different situations, and looking at someone that you see as it projects this power and money and wealth, who at the end of the day is just a scared little kid inside of an old body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Nancy, I sort of know which version you think is the best. Why do you think
this version is the best?
Why particularly do you think the Alastair Sim version is the best?
Well, it's odd, because I found this. Anybody remember Media Play? I got this at Media Play after I heard about this. Media Play was a chain that's long gone, and it has not been digitally remastered, so it's a little grainy. But I'd heard Leonard Maltin say that it was a really good version of A Christmas Carol. And so I tracked it down, and I think it was even in like the $10 bin. But Alastair Sim is so mean at the beginning of the movie. And the guy who's Marley, like you were saying earlier, is really good. And I thought Scrooge has to pull off a balance between being so mean that you're watching for his comeuppance, like Jim said. But he also has to have enough sympathy about him that when he turns, you're glad. You don't want him to see him consigned to the pits of Tartarus forever. And Alastair Sim did that. And in the part where Scrooge decides to celebrate Christmas, he's got this little, I'm not a big fan of giggling. It's part of my problem with a lot of teen movies, but it's this little giggle laugh that's just really kind of sweet. And his eyes get big, and he's just, I think it's because of him mostly that's my favorite version. And since I have the box, it wins. Just the rest of you can I'm sorry.
Well,
It's the childlike redemption.
yeah, for a couple commentary on the Alastair Sim version, Marley was played by Michael Holdern, who played the father, believe it or not, and a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. He, especially in his old age, was noted for his comedy. And so Alastair Sim, throughout his career, was primarily a comic actor. And I believe he did a lot of the panto. And his Scrooge took a lot from that. So there is definitely the intent. The intent was there. Not only that, but I forget the name of the juvenile who played the young Scrooge, was actually adopted by Sim and his wife. Not formally, but they were his mentors and his thing. So there was a lot of that sensibility, the comedy balance, you know, the tragedy, the horror with the comedy that was in that. And I'm going to do this just before I'm going to bring Darin in on it. When approached to play Scrooge, y'all know what George C. Scott said, don't you? Why do they need to make Scrooge again? They've got the Alastair Sim version.
Well, that just should settle it. I was just looking at the box and I can't tell. It's got a bunch of the actors' names on the back, but I couldn't see who played which roles. So I was looking for the young actor's name and I couldn't find it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, I can tell you who played the young Marley, however. Patrick McNee.
Oh,
When he was actually skinny as a rail. And you know, it's like, oh my God, that's John Steed. When did he get large? Anyway, Darin, okay, you've already said that the George C. Scott version is the one for you.
How many favorites do I get?
Well, you can have as many as you want, but you got to tell us why they're your favorites.
Okay, so I'll save the one I wrote for last. I spent a year of my life on it, so it's going to have to be in the top 4. I would say straight adaptation, I'm going George C. Scott, and I think we've said enough about that. He plays a really mean Scrooge. Marley's great. Christmas Present is awesome. I love Fred. I love the family. I love everything about it. Straight up favorite sort of adaptation that goes in a weird way is Scrooged. It makes me cry every time. The little boy doesn't talk for the entire film because he was traumatized. And then he comes up and says something to Bill Murray and I get weepy every time. So that one just touches me in a very emotional way every Christmas. My favorite weirdo version is the Doctor Who Christmas Carol. And if you've never, have y'all seen that?
No.
Oh my gosh. It's Matt Smith at his absolute best. They're, him, Amy, and Rory are trying to land on this planet and there's a storm and there's this grumpy old man who runs sort of the force field around the planet. And if he doesn't turn the thing off, then Amy and Rory are going to die. And the doctor comes down and is like, can you turn the thing off? And he's like, no. He goes, well, why not? He goes, I don't want to. And this guy is Scrooge. So Matt Smith has a time machine. He's the doctor. So what does he do? Past, present, future. And it is one of the most brilliant hours of television I have ever seen. And if you don't cry, you have no soul. And then last but not least, I think Carol, when I wrote that and they have the whole, whatever you think you're doing is bad enough to your character, make it worse. When you want to make a 17-year-old girl be as mean and nasty as Ebenezer Scrooge for her to be the Scrooge of your story, let me tell you, you got to punch her hard pretty much at every turn for the first 17 years of her life. And I did. So Scrooge, Carol by, I knew it was going to do that. That's why I keep turning the
Background off.
Carol by Darin Kennedy. Check it out.
available at all fine booksellers.
Available anywhere you buy books. And if we get a chance, I'll tell you a couple of my favorite little tweaks, if you will, but everybody else needs to answer first.
Okay.
So
Jeannie? What's your
Well,
favorite version or
oh,
versions
gosh,
and
that's
why?
so hard. I had completely forgotten about the Doctor Who one.
Isn't that
Um,
beautiful?
That one's cool. That was really cool.
With the sharks?
Everything
not making
about
this
that
up.
is it's sort of vague. I just remember the past, present, and future thing and went, oh wait, that is Scrooge. Um, my favorite overall still has to be, I will say, the George C. Scott one, but the Alistair Sim one has so many wonderful things that I will never pass it by if I get a chance to see it. And there is absolutely no one who has captured the joy of it still being Christmas Day than Alistair Sim when he falls back on the bed and the slippers fly up. And that's just, he just embodies it in a way that nobody else quite captured. Like Darin said, and Jim, I think you said a little bit too, the sheer color and richness of the George C. Scott one, the way the clothes are and the robes are, and they portray Scrooge as well off, and he dresses well. So that almost makes it worse because he looks prosperous and yet he has no soul. And then he's so mean to Fred, and he's just such a miserly asshole that, you know, that redemption arc, like we've all talked about, is really profound. And there is nothing as scary to me as the ghost of the future Christmas yet to come in Scrooged. But I will say overall, one of my absolute favorites is the Muppet Christmas Carol, because there is song and dance. Marley and Scrooge, Scrooge and Marley.
When you see him in Scrooge going and trying to, you know, let's just staple the antlers to the mouse's head. The
Yes,
the mouse
it's one of
heads.
my favorite scenes. The group is like horrified. No, I didn't. Right? And because you know him, you're like, no, he wasn't.
I always love the scene where he's deciding what everybody's getting for their Christmas present. And I think it's either toaster or towel. He's like, John Smith, towel. He's like, Jane Smith, toaster. Nope, towel. I just think that's Bill Murray at his best.
Okay.
Some of the ad libs in that, and I will have to say that the scene where, you know, it's impactful where in all of the versions where he sees his own name on the tombstone. But in Scrooged, Lord, that's just like back up from the TV screen when he's in the crematorium and it's his casket. It's like, woo, that's impactful.
Yeah, I would not want to see my casket go into the oven. No.
No.
Yes. Anyway, well, okay, we're coming up. This has been a lot of fun, and looking forward. I will now go check out this. I did see the George C. Scott version, and I do plan to try to find Scrooge and the Doctor Who Christmas Carol, which somehow missed me, given that I've watched every Matt Smith version.
But you got to watch the Muppets too now, Jane Marie.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Muppets makes a great drinking game.
It does. It does. Have a little nog.
What is the drinking game you use for the Muppets?
Every time the song starts.
And does the liquor have to be green? Because I hate creme de menthe.
It's not the Grinch, so you know it can be your liquor of choice. A toddy, a good English toddy.
Nah, it won't be toddy because I can't stand the butter. Anyway, so we're coming up on the end of what's been a very, very entertaining hour. And yeah, the Basil Rathbone one, I got to find that.
I've never seen that. I want to see that.
Yeah.
And I believe it is on YouTube.
Great. So wonderful. Okay. All righty then. So, Darin, where can what's your current releases? And yes, you can pimp Carol once again. And where can folks find you on the web?
DarinKennedy.com, and Carol is available on Amazon, ebook, paperback, or hardcover. And I always tell people the biggest difference in the two is in A Christmas Carol, you find out that if you die, nobody's going to care. Whereas in this one, if you don't turn your life around, you're just going to die. And I will leave it at that.
Okay. And is that your most recent release?
And that is my most recent book, though my third chess book that was on my previous little thing will be out early next year, hopefully from Falstaff Books.
Okay, great. Jeannie?
I'm Jeanne Adams once again. You can find me on most social media, but I generally hang out in the hive of scum and villainy that is Twitter most. You can find me at jeannieadams.com, and you can find me here on Continual.
Great. Jim?
So you can find me at jamesgnettles.com. You can find me at authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com. I do hang out occasionally in the hive of scum and villainy that is Twitter, as well as you find me more often on probably Facebook or Instagram, YouTube type stuff. Of course, here at Continual, Krampus has been out, but the print copies just have come out. And then yes, you do. And then I had a couple of weeks ago, I am in Off the Beaten Path 4 with what is kicking off a new series in Gothic horror. And theoretically, here in November is coming out Fairy Films, We Folk on the Big Screen. And I have a piece in that collection, which is talking about the 1984 version of Dune as fairy folk and fairy mythology.
Cool.
Oh, I forgot to say that I have a book coming out in the end of December, which will be Ring in the New at Caneham Castle, which is a holiday story. That's my latest. Sorry.
For New Year's, right?
I forgot to say. Yeah, for New Year's, yeah.
Cool. Okay, Nancy, what about you? What's your current or upcoming release, and where can folks find you on the web?
My latest release is The Steel Rose, which is the second volume in a historical fantasy trilogy, and it's set in the 100 days between Napoleon's escape from Elba and the Battle of Waterloo. And then, as you can see from the backdrop behind me, I do have Christmas stories available. I have a story in Christmas at Caneham Castle about a spy who's come to do one last errand for his father, but has a target on his back, and his partner is there to look after him, and they discover that maybe there's more to their partnership than they thought. And that's romantic suspense, no magic, ghosts, anything like that. And then Jeannie and I have Christmas at Outcast Station, which is science fiction set in the armpit of human space. And you can find information about me at nancynorthcott.com. I'm on Twitter a whole lot more than is probably good for me, and that's probably the best social media to find me, and that's at nancynorthcott.com. I mean, at Nancy Northcott.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll find you at Nancy Northcott. Anyway.
Well, on Twitter, I am at Nancy Northcott. I just got discombobulated for a second.
Hey, tis the season, that's for sure. And we hope that you all have a wonderful holiday season in all of the many holidays there to celebrate, and that you will find your own reason to giggle on the holiday of your choice, because the world has turned you inside out and brought the sun in. So with that, I want to say that I'm Jean Marie Ward for Continual Convention. Find us at continualconvention.com. Thank you.